on my way home, wherever I was, I would just go through, instead of focusing on the no's that day, I would focus on all the success I had and go into the next day with that in mind. Your positivity in sales is absolutely critical. Yelling and screaming never helps. What I've always preached is, look, communicate, 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 but don't yell at somebody. You might be able to coast on your background or your education or reputation. I've never seen that exist in MedTech. MedTech, you're only as good as your last sale. You're only as good as your last success, whatever that may be.
Ken Reale, CEO of 3 different companies, over 35 years experience inside of medical device sales, started as a rep, climbed the ranks, part of over 75 product launches, and now running Reale Vineyard. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jacob. It's good to be here.
I'm really excited to have you because you have so much great experience. And from the first time we ever talked, I've told everyone that I've talked to that you are probably the sweetest person I've ever met. And you can tell that you actually care about people. Before we get into too much of that, can you kind of tell us where it all started and who is Ken?
Sure. I grew up in the Midwest. I went to high school in Warsaw, Indiana, which is the epicenter of orthopedics. My goal, though, at that point in time in high school was to go to the service academy. I'm a first-generation college graduate. My parents could not afford to send me to college, but I knew if I could get into the Air Force Academy, I had free college, but also I could serve my country, and that was very appealing to me. I went through a process to get the nomination through a congressman. And the people involved at the time, there was an executive of Biomet that actually I met through that process. I had the biggest disappointment of my life at that point in time because I was medically disqualified once I was accepted into the Air Force Academy because I have a curve in my spine. And they wouldn't allow me to go any further. And I didn't even know I had that until I had my military physical. The Biomed executive felt terrible for me. And at the time he said, look, go to college, get your degree. We're always looking for smart people at Biomed. And if you're interested, give me a call after college. That phone call ended up occurring about 7 years later. I went to college, but then I spent a couple years in industrial sales, really thinking about what I wanted to do. And really came back to MedTech. And it really was driven by the patient impact that I felt I needed as a motivation in my career, and that was very appealing to me. So I made that call. He didn't call me back right away. It took about 4 times because I don't think he remembered who I was. Yeah. But we connected, and he opened the door for me a crack at Biomed. And obviously, I tried to make the most of it. So that's where it all started for me in MedTech. And my first job was a sales rep job in the Midwest, covering part of southwestern Michigan and northern Indiana, which is where I was from originally.
And tell me about, you knew someone high up at Biomed.
Yep.
You reached out to them, but they cracked the door open just a little bit. And I want to just expand on that for most of our listeners. They all tell me, I know somebody at Stryker. I know somebody at Zimmer. I know somebody here. So I should be good to get a job.
So what I meant by that, and it's a great question, is he introduced me to the right people. And they happened to have an opening. And I remember feeling, actually, when I think back to that, a tremendous amount of pressure because I didn't want to let him down. So the interview process went well. That is critical. I sold myself and sold my capabilities. I had some sales experience, none in MedTech. In fact, I wasn't even sure I would enjoy going into surgery because blood to me was not an attractive thing, and I was worried I was going to get sick in the OR. That was one of my initial fears. I remember this very distinctly. And but I went into it and felt a lot of responsibility to do well. And in fact, I got hired, and my first year, I did really well in training, and there were high expectations for me. I think we ranked our training class, and I remember I was second out of 35 people, and I was really proud of that. And I remember just really dedicating myself to the exams and learning. And about 9 to 10 months into my sales job, I was failing. I was missing my quota, and I think I was probably close to getting fired. I tell people this, and they don't believe me, but it's the truth. And but something interesting happened. There were two parallel things that I did at the time. One, I really worked on self-improvement. How can I be a better sales rep? So I took a Dale Carnegie sales class. A lot of people say, oh, that's kind of hokey. Well, no, it really worked. One of my things back then was I was not as good at objection handling. And when doctors or surgeons would object to what I was trying to sell them, I would get really nervous and just would not respond well, and versus just answering the questions. The other thing that happened at the time, in parallel, about 9 to 10 months into this role, was I saw tremendous success with my products clinically. I saw patients actually benefit tremendously, and it gave me great belief in the products. So it gave me much more confidence, inner confidence in what I was selling and what I was doing. And the combination of those two, coupled with being in the territory close to a year where people know your name and your face and you develop rapport, those things led to great success. So after the first year, I came close to being fired, and then I basically was very successful after that and grew my territory over $1 million over the next 4 years. Was able to hit quota every month, which was a source of pride for me. I didn't like missing quota. And then was faced with a decision on where I was going to go next with my career.
And tell me just real quick about investing in yourself, right? When you weren't having the success that you wanted, and people can say, oh, what are you doing getting Dale Carnegie's sales, right? Talk about just that for a second of investing in yourself when you're trying to improve.
Well, investing in yourself and learning is, in my opinion, lifelong. No matter what career or what position you're in or what pathway you're on, that's how you get better. And we all need to get better. I need to get better today, be better today than I was yesterday. So that's a part of my nature of who I am. And it's also about, at that point in time for me, about taking accountability. I wasn't hitting the numbers, and I was new, yes. I was young, yes, but I wasn't hitting the expectations of what they expected. And I took a lot of responsibility for that and really searched for what could I do. And it was interesting because when you start helping yourself, good things happen. And as I described, the good things happening were, certainly I got better at objection handling. And I would say the Dale Carnegie class, not to advertise them, but it did make a difference. And it allowed me to practice in an environment that was low pressure and those courses with other people. But seeing the success of the products happening at the same time gave me that inner confidence that, no, what I'm selling here makes a difference. It makes a difference to patients' lives, and this is good medicine. And that really was the clincher.
And let's talk about belief in what you're selling. Because what you're saying is you get the confidence, and many reps can sometimes struggle because they might not necessarily fully believe or understand everything their products do. But talk to me about when you truly know the impact you're having.
I would say that is paramount to any role I've had in MedTech, from sales rep to product manager to director of marketing or VP or GM or CEO. You have to believe in what you're doing and the impact of the products that you're marketing, selling, promoting, delivering to patients ultimately, because it is all about the patient in MedTech. And we all work very hard in MedTech, maybe harder than people realize sometimes, but it is ultimately to benefit patients. And if you don't believe that product's going to make a difference, it's very hard to do your job successfully. I've learned that. I learned that the hard way in my first sales job. I kind of half believed and certainly knew the products well. I did well in training, but when I actually saw them working and working really well and making a difference, that was the clincher. And ever since then, with every position I've taken, I've gone in with the first question in my mind is, do I believe in these products? Do I believe these products make a difference? Whether it's the clinical data that's telling me that, or it's something else that I've seen that I know it really works well and it's good medicine. To me, that's ultimately what's most critical to success in medtech.
And then you had a lot of success in sales. Once you believed in your product, you did the training, you started just believing in yourself, and then you stack the wins, right?
That's right.
You continue to see, hey, this is working. You are hitting quota, and then you hit quota 1 month to the next quarter, right? Tell me, what other tips do you have for people that are either wanting to get into medical device sales or that are maybe in their first several years in medical device sales to be that rep that continuously hits quota?
Planning is a big one. So you have to plan to win. And you have to realize that in sales in particular, you're going to make a lot of sales calls. And some calls are going to go really well. Some calls are not. And when they don't go well, you need to self-analyze and ask yourself, why didn't that go well? Was it me? Could I have done something better? Or is it just a bad time for the doctor? Or he's just not interested in the product right now? So that planning process for me was critical. I kind of knew, I got to the point every month where I knew what I had to do, how many calls I had to make to get to the number, and I would do that. And then even with objection handling, it got to the point where I knew if Dr. A said this, I would say this, he would say this, I would say this, and then I would close for the sale. And it became very practice for me because I practiced that. You know, you practice what you do every day, and you know your product inside and out. You learn what the most common objectives are. You plan for those. You make the calls. You know what your number is. And I've always regarded my quota as that's the commitment I've made to the company. They're counting on me to hit this number. And I went out and did it.
Taking the emotions out of things, especially in sales. And what I mean by that is for you, you talked about, hey, if I do this many calls, I'll get this many meetings, I'll get this many results. This is how it goes, right? I think that's one thing that sometimes sales reps miss is a lot of companies do a lot of research. They've paid a lot of money to understand, like, they just know numbers and this is how they do quotas, right? Like, and I teach our team this all the time, right? If someone tells me they get on 50 calls or they made 50 dials, I know that 6 to 8 people probably picked up. Can you just kind of talk to me about that piece? Because I feel like a lot of reps can sometimes get caught up because they bring in a lot of emotion inside of maybe they had a bad conversation with a doctor, or maybe something goes into it compared to when you're talking about hitting your number.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's just
you have to have short-term memory in sales. And look, you're only as good as your last sales call. Yes. But if it didn't go well, you forget about it, you learn from it, and you go to the next one. And you don't worry about the no's. You focus on the yeses you do get at the end of the day. I remember driving home, and I had a big territory. I was driving 60,000 miles a year, I remember. And on my way home, wherever I was, I would just go through, instead of focusing on the no's that day, I would focus on all the success I had and go into the next day with that in mind. Your positivity in sales is absolutely critical. And that actually carried through most of my career. I feel that positive energy is absolutely essential in any leadership role because that really permeates and emanates across other people, especially when you're leading organizations or departments, whatever it may be. So that focus in sales, because it's a lonely job. And I always appreciated that even when I was a CEO with our sales reps, they're out there fighting the fight every day alone. There's not a colleague they can walk down the hall and talk to. It's them in their car or their vehicle. Maybe they're good friends with surgeons they work with or the ancillary staff, and that's great. But at the end of the day, they're customers. And being positive and staying positive and having short-term memories on things that didn't go well, that maybe were beyond your control, are absolutely essential. I always go back when my first sales manager at Biomet had this saying, and he put it on all of his memos. And back then, this is in the early 90s, we got memos in the mail from him. It was not email. It wasn't even email, didn't exist even yet. And he always had press on regardless. And I remember when I started, I said, what does press on regardless mean? He said, you'll know what I mean. And he was right. So when things go bad or things happen that are beyond your control, you're having a bad day, press on regardless. That saying really worked. And we ended up having a dynamite region, and we were region of the year for 3 out of 3 years in a row. I remember at that point, this region in the Midwest, and that culture of press on regardless really permeated that whole group, because we'd all talk about it. Had a bad day, press on, press on regardless. And that was a great culture building. Sounds like a simple thing, but it was a big thing because it emanated across the culture of that particular region.
Can you just kind of talk, whether you were a sales rep or you were leading a company, what it meant for positivity to get you to the next step?
Well, it's absolutely critical when you're a sales rep, obviously, because you're alone out there and you may be having a bad day. So you go into your next call or next surgery or whatever it is, next interaction, and you're carrying that with you, it's not going to go as well, right? I mean, we all know that. When you're leading an organization, it could be compounded because you might be having a bad day, or maybe something bad happened that you just got wind of in the company, whatever it is. As a CEO, you get a lot of stuff that comes your way, but you're speaking to a group. Maybe it's the R&D team, or you're doing an all-company, all-hands meeting. Taking that with you is not going to be effective either. The culture, when you're CEO, the culture of the company is driven by you. I love HR. Human resources is a great asset to a CEO and to the whole organization, but they can't drive culture. The culture is driven from the top down by the CEO. So his or her attitude, his or her positivity, how they treat people, how they view the company and talk about the products and what everyone's doing and their role in that and making a difference with patients, that all permeates the company. And I always took that very seriously and that responsibility very seriously.
It's just so helpful because I know some people, like you said, this can be a lonely road, especially you're going in, maybe you didn't have a great case, or maybe someone at the hospital wasn't the nicest to you. And it's easy for us so many times to have a lot of good wins, but you have one negative and our brain will just focus on the negative, right? But as you see, and I just wanted to share for people who want to continue to grow in their career, is you're going to continue to have challenges that come in to your day-to-day most likely. But as a leader and as you grow, you can't wear your emotions on your sleeve, right? And that's something I've had to learn back when I was a rep. I was like, I just wear my emotions on my sleeve. I'm an open book. And then you learn why that's not the best thing, right?
Yeah.
You think it's a positive, but I just appreciate being able to hear that because, again, one thing I want to always just put out to everyone is positivity wins. And it sounds very corny. It sounds like, oh, hoo-hoo, but it's truly the common thread that I continue to hear from every professional.
100%. I agree. And when you're dealing with customers and you're dealing with the public, you have to be someone once said to me, one of my managers, you have to be a chameleon. You have to, if you're not feeling great, you got to put on a smiley face and move forward. Now, at the same point, as a leader, as a person, you have to be authentic too. And there has to be times with people that you trust that you share your bad days. That's important. You can't just mask them all the time. So there's a time and a place for that. And certainly that was something for me, particularly with my wife and my spouse, that was a critical support for me that I couldn't have done anything in my career success-wise without her support. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And if I had a vent to somebody, it was usually her. and she was a great listener.
Did she try to fix it ever?
No, she was smart enough not to.
I was gonna say, I share that to all my guys out there. We all love to try to fix when maybe we listen. But no, I love that. And so you had a successful sales career,
Yes.
right? Then you made another jump.
Yes,
You left sales.
I did.
Bring me into that conversation of what made you leave sales.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest decisions I made at that point in my career. And it's interesting because I remember interviewing for a regional manager role. I remember this distinctly. And I was going to move to Cleveland. I was one of the final candidates, and I didn't get it. And I remember being so upset. I was so disappointed. I was crushed, really. And I moved forward, kept hitting my sales numbers, doing really well. And then this product manager position came up in the home office. And they said, we really want you to consider this. We think you have talent. You have a lot to learn. This could be a great opportunity for you. Now, when I did the math on it, I was moving from the Midwest to New Jersey, and I was taking a 6-figure pay cut at that point in time. So I had to really sell my wife on this. We had 3 young children. And what I told her at the time is, look, I know I can sell. And if I'm not good at this job, I can't be a product manager, and I'll give it a year or 2. And if I can't do it, then I'll go back to sales. And so it's a low risk. I'm young in my career. I was in my early 30s at that point in time, I believe. And she supported me, and we did it. And that was really, when I think back on my career now, making that jump really put me on a trajectory. Not that I wanted to be a CEO, because I wasn't even thinking about it, but that put me on a pathway to be able to become a CEO just because of what I was exposed to from that point forward.
And tell me more about when you say you weren't even thinking about being a CEO, because most people that are watching this think that everyone who came out of college was on their vision board, they're going to be a CEO in 10 years. Tell me how it kind of happened for you, just real quick, of when you say, hey, the pathway to become a CEO, because I don't think many people understand what that pathway could even look like.
I mean, every pathway is different, right? Every circumstance, everyone's career path is their own. And the environment is different from era to era. Back in the 90s and 2000s when I was growing in my career, it's different than it is today in the 2020s. But so you have to take your own path. But certainly to become a CEO, you have to understand multiple facets of the organization. So I understood sales at that point in my career. When I became a product manager, with the sacrifice that I made to do it, I understood the broader part of the company. And I was doing product development at the time. Actually, I was developing spinal hardware and fixation for Biomet. And I worked closely with a group of surgeons. I worked closely with our regulatory affairs department, all these aspects that I had no knowledge of before. And it was completely eye-opening. I learned a tremendous amount. And that put me on a pathway to grow and understand a broader aspect of medical device than just sales. Having that sales foundation, I can tell you, was paramount in my whole career. Why? Because that's where the battle is fought and won every day. And having that and understanding that, no matter what the company was critical. And the role of the sales rep in the success of MedTech is paramount. If your sales reps aren't happy, your company's not going to be successful. I learned that very quickly. But to grow and have a broader leadership role as a CEO, you need to go beyond sales and sales management to understand the broader company. And that didn't really, so that happened for me over the course of time. I was really slow in that process. I was a product manager between Biomet and then Stryker for 5 or 6 years, just a product manager. And then I became a senior product manager and then a marketing director and then a VP finally. And it really wasn't till I became a general manager. And I remember when they asked me to interview, I was at Smith & Nephew and I was VP of marketing. and the general manager had just gotten promoted to a different part of the business and was moving away. And they said, we really want you to interview for the general manager role of this business. And I was like, really? And I was really surprised. And I ended up getting that job. And that's what I started probably, and that was in 2006, thinking, maybe I could be a CEO someday. But it wasn't until then. So that was pretty far into my career.
You don't always have to have the end plan in mind when you start.
No.
Just focus on where you're at, do an amazing job. And like you said, you never know what relationship
Right.
can take you to the next step.
Absolutely. Make that day, whatever day it is, you make that great. And of course you have goals. You have annual goals. I always did. But those goals can change too over time. Even annually, you have to adjust mid-year or whatever. That's fairly typical, but make each day great and build on those great days.
And then tell me about, you had a wife with 3 kids.
Yep.
You went to a more expensive area to live
Yep.
to make 6 figures less.
Yes.
It shows how great of a salesperson you are to be able to do that.
That or my wife really loved me and supported me. One of the two.
Yes.
Yeah.
But tell me about, why leave the safe, the comfortable, what you've known to go to this next step?
Yeah, I mean, that's more my personality. I love challenges. And I felt at that point in time, I knew sales, I had been successful, and I had hit my quota for, at that point, over 4 years every month. And I was like, okay, what's next? I didn't get the sales management job that I thought I really wanted. This came up probably 4 months after that. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll give this a shot. And I love new challenges. I love to learn and expand, and I learn. I'm an experiential learner. I read a lot as well, but I really learn most effectively by doing things. And I felt this was an opportunity to learn, to see if I was good at this or not. I was kind of a cocky sales rep at that point in time and thought I knew it all. I remember thinking, oh, this job's going to be easy because I know what needs to be done, and I've been a successful sales rep, so this is going to be a snap. And it was not. It was challenging. I learned a tremendous amount, especially the first 18 months. A lot of things I had no clue about, and that was very effective for me. And that's always how I've learned best. Experiential learning with significant reading on the side too, on self-improvement and things I can do better, but combination.
And take me into those first 18 months where you said you learned a lot, right? Coming from a great sales rep, this is going to be easy, to a whole new world.
Things like Gantt charts, things like, the product development process, regulatory affairs, the fact that you have to file with FDA, 510Ks at this point is what these were. Working closely with a surgeon design team, along with engineers from R&D. Everyone had their own agenda, not in a negative way, but their own ideas of how they wanted things done. And as a product manager, you have to try to compile all those and get the best outcome, the best design. So those were all things that I had never done before. And it was a tremendous learning experience for me just to take those steps and experience those. I had some really good mentors, people that looked out for me, realized what I knew and what I didn't know. And at that point, I didn't even know what I didn't know. So they were fortunate. I was fortunate that I had people that were able to guide me along the way to make sure I didn't step into something too badly where I screwed something up, So
you were very successful in sales.
Yes.
And then you were able to learn the 18 months of a lot going on there, and then climb the ranks in marketing. Can you kind of talk to me about that side of it?
Sure. I was recruited, so this was all at Biomed. And, by the time I left Biomed, I understood product management. I had launched at that point 4 different products that I had helped develop as a product manager. And Stryker recruited me then. And I really liked Stryker and the culture and felt like I could grow there. And I really evaluated that carefully. So I took that job as a product manager, and this was more in developing biologics at this point, not in spine, but not spinal hardware. And they liked my background in spine and combination with sales, and it was a good fit. So I started there, and that's where I also learned to manage people. And I was not good at managing people right away at all. I was a micromanager. I was just a high intense person at that point in my career and made a lot of mistakes. Fortunately, at Stryker, I had some really good mentors and people that I learned a tremendous amount from. And I remember getting my first 360 feedback, which was common at Stryker in those days, and being just devastated at some of the comments. And I learned a tremendous amount from that, and took it very seriously and progressed and changed my management skill set. Read a lot of books as well, and talked to a lot of people to change my management and leadership style. And that style was honed right there. And, as I've grown in my career at that point in time, it really came from those experiences, those early experiences at Stryker managing people, that dictated the type of leader I became later.
Mm. And talk to me about that managing style and how you changed it. And I ask this as someone who is growing, having their own team, and I've had to go from, I've been told to make me feel a little bit better that every rep that went from just out for their own, they sales, you usually have the lone wolf who can go hunt and go do everything. And then this is what happens in a lot of sales organizations. You have the lone wolf who goes and hits all the numbers, and they're like, let's put them into managing
Right.
other people. And then most of those people will be like, well, this is just what you do, and this is how I did it, so why don't you all just go do it? And then we don't talk about what they got going on in their family and what their past experiences are. And so talk to me about you saying, hey, you're a little intense at first, got some feedback, and then like you said, you read some books, like maybe what some of those books were, and like how you created to start being able to learn how to manage people.
Well, the one book I read, and it sticks in my mind, I still have it on my bookshelf in my office, is Principle-Centered Leadership by Stephen Covey. And it's a very intense, long book. I mean, if you pick it up, you're like, holy cow, this is going to take me weeks to read. But I read it, and it gave me a lot of great feedback. But I would say, look, human nature, especially if you come from sales or you come from any individual performing role, and even as a product manager early on, I was an individual performer. You depend on yourself, and you know yourself. Yeah, you might have to work in a team sometimes, but ultimately it's your success. Every day you're working for yourself. But when you're leading a team, it's about trust. And trust is something that people don't always intuitively have in the business world. You have to trust people, and you have to trust the people you're working with. You have to delegate to them and then trust they're just going to do the job, not stand over them. Make sure it's clear, the communication of what the expectations are and what you need them to do. That's your job as a leader and a manager. But at the end of the day, you have to trust. And what I learned is if you don't have trust, you're really not a manager and a leader. You're a babysitter. And and if you can't trust those people, okay, then maybe you have the wrong team. So those are evaluations that a mature leader has to do, and a mature manager, and that's what I learned. Fortunately, in the case for me at Stryker in my early days, it wasn't about having the wrong team. It was about my lack of trust and learning that, no, I need to delegate and trust and know that I have the right people until proven otherwise, and they never proved otherwise, and move forward that way.
I love it. And what helped you to make that jump of being like, I'm going to trust? What coping mechanisms did you have for the first couple of weeks and months when you had to start giving pieces and saying, hey?
The hardest thing with anything in life when you're trying to change habits, especially mental habits of how you think about things, is starting, right? And taking that first step. And after I got this feedback on the 360, I just knew I had to do it if I wanted to be successful and a successful leader and manager. And I did at that point. Because I wanted to be good at what I did. So I took that leap of faith. But once you start doing it, it becomes habit and your style of delegating and, okay, you're going to do this and you got it. And really motivating people in that way and just encouraging them, knowing that you're there if you need them, but this is their baby. And that, what I saw pretty quickly, actually, and this made me realize I was on the right pathway, was their morale improved dramatically. They felt empowered. They felt the ownership of what they were doing. Because when someone owns something, their performance, whether it's in sales or in this case in marketing, their morale goes up, their responsibility factor goes up because they know you're trusting them. So then that trust becomes reciprocal. They know you trust them. That improves their morale. They're trusting you more as their manager and leader. It goes hand in hand.
And then that allows you as the manager to probably go work on some other things.
Right.
Or
right.
just even do touch points with people and maybe just do check-ins with
Absolutely.
others. And I just share that because this is something I'm learning, right? Instead of being like,
we all
what are you doing? Hey, what's this going done? You have to learn to let go. Yeah. And I remember learning that, and I just want to share this in strength and conditioning. There's the strength coaches who realized they couldn't leave their weight room. And there was a guy who missed birthdays, family events, kids, big events. And then he had been at the same place for like 20 years. And then he left one day and came back and he was like, how'd it go? Like, what was wrong? And all the coaches were like, nothing. It went great. Yeah. And I remember learning that at 22 at a conference where he said, for 20 years, I thought it had to be done a certain way. I thought I had to be the one there. And if I would have just trusted the team that I had brought on that were all capable human beings, I could have been at those birthday parties. Right. I could have had the experiences, and it probably would have ran better without me in certain scenarios. And so I share that because I always love being able to learn from other people. I'm currently going through this, and so that's why it makes me at least feel a little bit better to be like, okay, so other people have felt a challenge when they go into from being a rep to all these aspects.
100%. And I think it's normal in some respects. We can't beat ourselves up over it, but it's a mental adjustment everyone has to make when you go from individual performer to managing and leading people.
Yeah. And then you go from, like you said, product manager, then you started like leading the teams, right? Yep. And then you became VP for sales and marketing. Yep. Can you kind of tell me what that was like of like the difference of being a vice president for marketing and then a vice president of sales?
Yeah. Well, in MedTech, historically, there's always some animosity between marketing and sales, and I had been in both roles, so I kind of understood that. But to me, when you're VP of both, bridging those two together is absolutely critical. And your leader of sales, your leader of marketing have to be aligned. Maybe not always, and they can agree to disagree on certain things, and that's normal. And that creative tension or tension in the business is not always a bad thing. Everyone doesn't always have to agree on everything in business. That is never effective, actually. You get to a better point if you can have robust disagreement because you have trust, by the way, in your organization, and then come to the better outcome. So to me, that's the way I led it. And it was effective that way because I had the right people in place and we had built trust over time. So those disagreements and discussions on strategy or tactics and what we were doing were always really healthy. And that ended up being when I continued to lead teams and at a higher level, that was always my mantra, even with the executive teams I led, is to start with trust and really work on building that trust across the whole team with every department. Because if you have that in place, you can be very successful. I'll tell you, it wasn't always perfect because nothing ever is, but that's what we always work towards.
Yeah. And can you just talk about why there is sometimes conflict between marketing and sales? Because, like we were talking off air, many times sales reps will say marketing doesn't know what they're doing. And then marketing will be like, we give them what they do. And then sales reps don't do. I've heard both ends, right? And you've led these teams. So can you just kind of talk about that?
It's I think just a lack of understanding on both sides. If you're in sales and you've never been in marketing, you sometimes don't realize the constraints, or whether it's budgetary or it's regulatory or compliance, on promotion, or all those things have constraints in marketing. So you have to work within a certain guardrails. So sales reps, well, why don't you just do this or do that? And when you're in sales, you have much more freedom to kind of do things on your own sometimes, where in marketing, because you represent in the corporate office a certain brand, you're limited. So that's part of it. And I think from a marketing perspective, understanding sales, if you've never carried the bag and been out in the field, you don't understand the sales challenge of having the no's that you hear on a daily basis, and some of the frustrations if you feel like the product isn't being promoted the way the surgeon wants to see it, or what's most effective to get it sold, or maybe the surgical technique was missing some steps in the marketing material, and how frustrating that is because you're basically hearing it. The marketing person doesn't hear it. So that's some of the issues, I think, on the sales side that make them frustrated. And I think those, again, it comes down to communication and trust and getting that feedback across both sides. And if you have that, does that mean you're never going to have a problem? No. But does that mean the problem is going to get resolved more quickly and efficiently? Yes.
Yeah. And like you said, I've heard this commonly between executives is it first comes to the trust, being able to trust that you can say honest
That's right.
feedback, right? And not get in trouble or whatever it is, and have good conversations.
100%. You treat people with respect, and culturally, that's what you're always striving for in any disagreement. But you should be able to be honest with people and say, hey, this is where I'm really falling down here out in the field with this, or in marketing, I just don't have the money to do that, or we can't even say that from a regulatory or compliance perspective, and here's why. And yelling and screaming never helps. I know people get agitated, particularly if it's impacting their pay. If you're a sales rep and your commissions, I get that, but obviously it's not effective. And what I've always preached is, look, communicate, and build trust, but don't yell at somebody. That's probably not their fault.
Anything in life I've learned, whether it's personal relationships, business relationships, anything you're doing, directions to get somewhere, right? Communication is everything.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's just a miscommunication between two parties that cause challenges. And I can tell you of what you just said, I was the rep who had a big deal, and then marketing would be like, no, we can't. And as the rep back in the day, when it affects your pay, you can't understand it.
Right.
Now, when you're able to understand all of the regulations and all of the red tape that marketing is dealing with on a day-to-day, you understand, oh, there's these pieces of it. But I just share that because communication is, whether it's personal, professional, that's the lifeline to everything. And I think most people just have a miscommunication, and that's why we start getting, oh, this division doesn't know what this division is doing, or this side of the company doesn't know what this side is doing.
Right.
And it's going to being able to, like you said, have open communication.
Well, there's no such thing, Jacob, as over communication. I've never heard anyone get in trouble for over communicating, or people mad that, oh, they're over communicating this topic. That's pretty rare. Now, what I've learned is people hear things in different ways. Some people are better reading something on an email, or some people are better listening to something. So as a CEO, I would strive, especially if it was something really critical to the company or the culture or our strategy, of communicating things in multiple ways, whether it was my weekly email to the company or it was an all hands meeting. I would repeat some of the same things. And I had a 7 times rule. And the 7 times rule is simple. You got to say something 7 times for someone to really absorb it completely. Because so many times you might be sitting in a meeting or even reading an email, and in this day and age where people are multitasking, they're not always absorbing things the way they should. And you just have to realize that. That's just the reality. So that's why the 7 times rule really applies, even more so in today's environment. And people have to realize, oh, I already said that. Well, did you say it 7 times?
Yeah.
Because 7 times maybe over a month or 7 times over 6 weeks. That's really important. You have to enforce it.
Everyone's got so much going on every single day, and just saying it once, and then what we've seen is then you can get frustrated and be like, I already said this once or twice, right? But I even think about, just if you think about everything someone has on their life, kids, family, personal, business, all the stuff. That's such a great rule of just saying it.
I used to make a
times.
joke out of it. I'd be like, okay, this is the 5th time. You're going to hear this 2 more times. And people would laugh and they would get it, because it really is important. And it's a way to, look, an organization's so much more powerful if everyone's aligned, pushing in the same direction. So that's where communication is absolutely critical, and over communication is critical, and communicating in different ways, different forums is critical because it allows everyone to get aligned and understand.
You're able to go communicate. You have this success, right, going into the VP, and then you went to a general manager role.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the general manager.
Yeah, I had never thought about being a general manager. This was at Smith and Nephew, and my boss was being moved forward, actually promoted in a way to a new division, and so his position was open. It was general manager of this business at Smith and Nephew, and HR came to me and said, "Look, we really want you to interview for this." And I was like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah, I think you qualify." So I interviewed, and I got it, and I remember that was early 2006, and that was a pretty big deal. I had never thought I'd reach that point in my career. Really enjoyed it. We were in the process of really growing this business and hiring. I remember we hired 80 sales reps that year in 2006, 80 direct reps. And we really had a model that we were building, a sales model, and had the great products and a great R&D pipeline. I did my first M&A deals when I was a general manager too, to help build that division. So it was a lot of fun, and I really felt at that point, I was surprised how confident I felt when I took that role. It's like, wow, I really do understand product development because I've done it, and understood regulatory affairs because I've worked closely with regulatory affairs over many years at Biomed and then Stryker, and obviously new sales and sales management and marketing and development. And so I felt very comfortable in the role. It wasn't a stretch for me at that point in time because I had been through so many different roles. And what's the biggest thing I think for me at that stage in my career is I was in every role long enough where I could live through my mistakes. And I can't emphasize this enough in anyone's career. You can't get promoted too quickly in an organization because you need to realize that you make decisions along the way. Some of them are going to be right and some of them are going to be wrong. But if you're in a role for 4 or 5 years, let's say, you're going to realize you made some wrong decisions early on in that role, and you're going to have to correct them, and you're going to have to live through those. And those were tremendous learning experiences for me. When I was a product manager, I made a ton of mistakes, or even as director of marketing or VP of sales and marketing. But I was in those roles long enough where I had to fix them. And I realized what those mistakes were and was able to move forward and fix those. But if you get promoted too quickly, like every 2 years, which a lot of people have that mentality in this day and age, you don't ever realize what your mistakes were. You don't get to learn from those. So growing your career slowly over time was a huge advantage to me because that's why I felt so prepared when I became a general manager, because I had seen myself and was long enough in each stage of my career where I could see the good things I did and the things I could have done better.
What was your biggest takeaway? Because I know you had takeaways at each step, but what was your biggest takeaway at being a GM?
I think it's that you're no longer head of marketing. You're no longer head of sales. You're certainly not head of R&D or manufacturing. Those were all things that were under my leadership. So you had to take a broader role, and it kind of goes back to some of the elements in some ways of when I first started managing people, but I had to relearn them at a higher level, meaning you had to trust the VP of sales. You had to have trust in the VP of marketing. You had to have trust in the head of R&D and the head of operations, because those people were running a big part of the business. You couldn't micromanage those. Just like when you're running a department, it's the same concept, just much bigger. Not only that, but those people all needed to get along and be cohesive. And that was your role as a general manager, is bringing that cohesiveness to that group, setting the tone of what the top priorities and objectives were, yes, but then they had their own priorities underneath that, and those had to match as well. So there were a lot of learnings and relearnings to me. I remember thinking back saying, I almost have to think back to when I first started managing people, because now I'm managing leaders, and take some of the same approach when I'm managing leaders now to how I had to learn how to manage people. And it started with trust and communication.
I love that, because I didn't even think about the learning curve of now you're dealing with the leaders that have all the people that went through that same transition you just went through on that process. And now you have to also manage them in that aspect. So just what I want people to see is the learning just never stops.
The learning never stops. And look, I think at that point I was reading probably, I would pick out at the beginning of the year 4 to 6 business books that I would read through the course of the year. And some of them were great, and I would pick up on things and apply them. Others were not. I was like, that doesn't really fit me or my style. But I was constantly looking for new material and things to grow and learn, because I was always felt responsible. I wanted to be the best leader I could be for this organization. And I knew if I wasn't growing, the organization wasn't growing. And I always took that very seriously.
And I love that, because it's also one of those, you just lead from the front, right? How can you ask someone else to grow if you're not growing as well? And so I love that you take that approach. And then talk to me now, your GM and then CEO opportunities start coming up.
And that was a combination really I fell into as well. I had moved my family at that point multiple times, and my oldest daughter was entering high school. And with Smith and Nephew, there was an opportunity to move again. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because of the age of my daughters. It just didn't work personally. I didn't want to take them out of, my daughter had just finished her freshman year in high school, and it was not a good time. And the CEO opportunity came up, and I was being recruited for it. I'd been successful at GM at that point for 5 years, had learned a lot. So I interviewed for this role. It was a turnaround situation, difficult situation, because the company was declining in revenue. But I felt like maybe I could fix it, and I didn't have to move my family. So I took it. And it was a very hard first CEO role, very hard, and ended up having, after 5 years, selling the company in pieces through an auction process. Not a great outcome. And I thought I was really done as a CEO at that point. I didn't know, do I want to be a CEO again? Can I really do this job? And I will tell you, my entire board at that point was a reference for me. They really believed in me, and they're the ones that propped me up, particularly my board chairman at the time, but all my board members. And they said, no, Ken, you did nothing wrong. You did everything you could. It just was a situation. Sometimes situations happen in business that are beyond your control, and that's what happened here. So that led to my next CEO role. So I said, okay, I'm going to try this one more time. And that's when I went to women's health, which I was very nervous about, but ended up doing okay
Yeah, and let's talk about that. So you had been in orthopedics
my whole career.
your whole career.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And then you get the opportunity to run a company
Yeah.
now in the women's health, which is fun. I came from the women's health world, so
Yes.
being able to see both sides.
Yeah.
But now you're going into, you just had your first experience.
Yep.
It didn't go the way that you thought it would.
Yep.
Your whole career has been in orthopedics. Now you're going into women's health.
Yes.
And now they're saying, we trust you to run a company in a space that you've never been a part of.
They did. And I will say it was a private equity owned company. They took months to recruit me. So it was a almost 4-month process. And they used an organization called GH Smart. GH Smart has a process called top grading. And the way top grading works is you develop a set of priorities of what you need the candidate to have experience-wise. And then you match their resume with that experience. And when you interview them, you have them cite examples of why your experience matches what they're looking for. So that was part of the interview process, and that made me feel somewhat confident, although I was still a little uncertain, that I could do it because their scorecard, it's called scorecard of priorities they needed the leader to have, I fit. But I still went in with a lot of trepidation. But what I learned quickly is, I had a great team, a great executive team that I inherited. And I learned a tremendous amount from them. But then I realized that MedTech is pretty similar across all aspects, whether it be orthopedics or women's health or cardiovascular or wound or some other area. There might be some subtle differences, and you really need to understand those. I'm not de-emphasizing that, but the general approach to MedTech, and whether it's the regulatory process or manufacturing or how you're selling the products, are generally very similar. And that was very gratifying to me. Once I figured that out after about 6 months, I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And we grew the company tremendously, doubled the revenue and doubled the EBITDA, and ended up selling it to another private equity firm. And then we kept going and sold it for a huge return on investment to a strategic. And so it was a great success for me and my management team.
Talk to me about, you're 6 months in, you feel like you can do this, but how did you continue to manage and work with your leaders and work with your team to put yourself in a place where you're like, I can lead a women's health company?
So, for me, one of the things that I really did there is I went back to something I was really familiar with, and that was sales. So I went out in the field and I rode with the reps. And I said, I really got to understand how these products are sold, what the differences are that I'm not appreciating, how they're working clinically. Because going back to my earlier statement, I wanted to believe in what we were doing and understand that they really made a difference and how they made a difference. So I did that. And I spent time in the field to really learn. And that was tremendously helpful. It helped me connect the dots in the business. And so I did that, obviously spent time with all the departments. We had a pretty big international component too. 40% of our revenue was outside the US. So I spent some time in Europe and with our sales teams there. So it was tremendously helpful.
You then did the work. You went out with the reps. You continued to work with the team. You talked to people, because I think many times sales reps and people getting in this industry think CEOs just are in some meetings doing some Excel sheets and seeing what that piece is, compared to, you're taking a very proactive approach.
Yes.
And making sure that you are seeing what everyone a part of the company is doing?
What I've learned as a CEO, and I've done this in all my CEO roles, all three companies, is you have to spend time in the field. Now, you can't spend an inordinate amount of time. It's got to be balanced with your other responsibilities. But there's so many subtle things that can occur in the field that aren't appreciated or aren't understood. And just being able to connect the dots on those and understand what's really happening. Here's some of the objections. Here's some of the issues I think are absolutely critical because it allows you to make better decisions at the top of the organization. Not that you're going to get in the way of what the R&D team or the marketing or the sales management team is doing. You got to be very careful you don't do that when you ride with the sales force. You can't. But you use that perspective when you're in meetings with them to better understand and make the right decisions for the organization.
I love that. And then you come in 5 years, you double the company.
Yep.
You get it sold twice.
Yep.
Very successful CEO experience there.
Yes.
And then now talk to me about then your third
Yeah.
company that you go be a part of.
So we closed on the last sale in mid-February of 2020. It was amazing because about 2 weeks after that is when COVID hit.
Everything shut down.
Yeah. And had been interviewing at the time actually for an organization that I ran at Smith and Nephew, and they were now private on their own, and they were in some cases looking at recruiting me back. And it was an opportunity to potentially take the company public. So I gravitated to that role and was hired for that role and started in April remotely because no one was in the office. And it was a very odd time to be a CEO, especially a new CEO coming in. You weren't able to do a lot of the relationship building that you count on doing face-to-face and personally, walking through an office with people and getting to know people. The first year or so in that role was very much done remotely, and that was very odd. It was very challenging. I tried to do the best I could to work remotely and be effective. I think I was reasonably okay at that. We ended up taking the company public February of 21, so I wasn't even there a year, and we were able to accomplish that. So we got a lot done because we had a really good team, and then we did a number of acquisitions and took that business through organic growth as well as through M&A, 80% larger than what it was when I left.
Wow.
So.
And talk to me about taking a company from private to public.
Well, there's a lot of steps, and a lot of these steps are legal and financial. But the company really has to be prepared because being public, everything's open and everything is available for people to digest and read. So from a compliance perspective, and I'm talking about even healthcare compliance, from a regulatory perspective, from a financial perspective, how you recognize revenue, all these aspects need to be looked at carefully. The risks in the business, what potential risks exist need to be articulated well. These are all things about going public that when you're running a private company, you don't necessarily have to think about. But when you go public, it becomes really an open area that you have to make sure you're being very thorough. We had excellent legal advice and excellent financial team, and we were able to pull it off.
I love being able to see your journey of going from the rep to then it didn't happen overnight, right? To where you are, 3 exits. And now you actually get the opportunity to go sit on boards of companies. Can you just explain to people, because I always want to give the full picture of what you could eventually do with your life if you do success in this industry. Like now you sit on boards. So what does that entail?
Well, look, leadership's always been a privilege to me. It's not it really is an honor, whether you're leading a company or you're serving on a board. And what I enjoy about my board work today is the interaction with the CEO And because I've been in that seat in many different types of situations, good and bad, I have a unique perspective, and it's a lonely job. So that relationship to me is the most critical, and I think it's the one where I can be most effective as an independent board director, is working with that CEO in a way that is productive, whether it's mentoring, and I don't like to use that word with another CEO, or it's just being a ear that they can talk to, of someone that is unbiased and just has a view on things that gives them a perspective. But I take that very seriously. I love to see new MedTech technologies get launched into the market. I've been involved with 75 different launches in my own career. So being involved with boards that are building and launching new products that are helping everything from mothers to babies to people with degenerative disc disease, these are all things I'm involved with today. So it's very gratifying to me, and it allows me to have a balance in my life that I couldn't have as a CEO, where I can work on a special business with my wife and also keep my fingers in MedTech.
I love that. And now talk to us about this special business that you do with your wife.
Well, so my wife and I decided about 10 years ago, and we were living in Salt Lake City at the time, and our last daughter, our youngest of our three, was going off to college. We started talking about what we were going to do with our lives. What would the next chapter look like? And at the time, we were joking because we were on a trip to Napa Valley. Let's just get in the wine business. We loved wine. Our wine journey had matured tremendously over 20 years or so. But we woke up the next morning and we said, we should really look at this and take this seriously and see if it makes any sense at all. So we spent 5 years or so really looking at wine regions across the country and settled on Walla Walla, Washington, which is where our winery and vineyard is based, and found that property in 2021. And we've built a business on that. So we've just launched our first 4 wines last fall, opened our tasting room on our vineyard, and our wines have done very well. We have an excellent winemaker. We've surrounded ourselves with people that really are experienced in this industry, from our winemaker to our vineyard manager. So we are certainly the business owners and the voice of hospitality and sales, but we have great expertise around us. And our wines have scored between 93 and 95 points. So we're very excited about that and excited about the future of what this means. We enjoy working together. Our daughters are involved too in some respects. So it's a family business in some ways. So it's a great next chapter.
I love it. And you still get to be a part of MedTech because you sit on the boards.
Yes.
But then you also get to come and now get to use your experience of being a CEO of MedTech companies now to run a winery in a vineyard.
Although it's very different in many ways.
Very different.
And I certainly try not to apply too much of MedTech in winemaking, but there are some similarities. It is a regulated industry, so that is true. Wine is a regulated product like MedTech. Customer interaction is a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed that. And having people come into our tasting room and leaving happier than when they came in is always a joy to my wife and I.
Yeah. Well, you have an absolutely beautiful place. That's where we're filming everyone is in the tasting room. So it's absolutely gorgeous. Now, one question I really wanted to ask, because there's going to be people of all different ages I'm graduating college, I'm thinking about medical device sales, or the person who's 15 years or 7 years or 20 years in their medical device journey, but maybe they're looking at the next step for them, right? What's your advice to people wanting to do medical device sales, do MedTech, medical device marketing, but come into this world and have a career that can last over 30 years and continue to grow?
I think my advice would be, first of all, appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate that what we do in MedTech is very unique, where we can really see the benefit of the products that we work so hard on, whether it's in sales or marketing or product development or regulatory or manufacturing, whatever it is, finance. Everyone has a role and can make a difference in MedTech, and they can see and feel that. So take that seriously, appreciate that. But if you're going to get in MedTech, you're signing up for sustained effort to grow. And I don't say that lightly. I think a lot of industries, you might be able to coast on your background or your education or your reputation. I've never seen that exist in MedTech. MedTech, you're only as good as your last sale. You're only as good as your last success, whatever that may be. It challenges us to be the best form of ourselves in MedTech, which is why I've always loved it. Because people are counting on us to innovate, to grow, to improve their lives over time. And that's a constant churn. So we have to constantly grow. And if you're not going to sign up for that, it's probably not the place for you, because that's what MedTech is all about.
I love that. And it's just continue. We always try to push out is this is for places of people who want to make an impact,
Right.
want to change people's lives, be a part of something bigger than themselves. But like you said, and I hope everyone can take that, is you're going to continue to grow here.
That's right.
And if you're just trying to coast or just take it easy, maybe medical device, MedTech's not the space for you.
That's right.
Because we get to work with so many amazing people and do things that truly change people's lives in the best ways.
That's right.
And so I really appreciate being able to talk to someone like yourself who's been able to have 35 years in this industry, had a lot of experience, now has a beautiful vineyard and able to help other people. Now, real quick before we sign off, where can people find you guys if they want to come and taste your
sure.
wine, they
Thanks,
want to get
Jacob.
your wine, or they can come visit?
Well, come to us in Walla Walla. Our tasting room is right on our vineyard, but you can go to our website, www.realifamilyvineyard.com, and you can order our wine, our first 4 wines, and we've got 7 more wines we'll be releasing this year.
I love it. And also, if they ever wanted to come visit Walla Walla, and do you have any recommendations on how they would set that up?
I think you can, if you search Walla Walla, Walla Walla Tourism or Walla Walla Wine, there'll be plenty of places that will be recommendations where you can stay. There's multiple hotels. Wine tourism is huge here. And most people that come here, they come here for wine. They have a terrific time. And it's a beautiful place to come in the summer and the fall.
Yeah. And I just want everyone to know it is an absolutely gorgeous place. It has a small town feel in Walla Walla, but the great food, great wine scene, and they get to meet great people like yourself. But Ken, I just want to say thank you so much for just being able to speak to our listeners, and congratulations on all of your success, and can't wait to see where the new venture takes you.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for coming.